The old Victorian house on Maple Street had been in our family for 4 generations. When Grandma Rose passed away 18 months ago, she left it to me in her will, much to my family's surprise and displeasure. At 29, I was the youngest of 3 siblings, working what my family considered a dead-end government job, while my older brothers Marcus and David had both gone into private business. Marcus, 33, ran a struggling construction company that was always one bad contract away from bankruptcy. David, 31, worked in real estate but hadn't closed a significant deal in over a year. They'd both expected to inherit portions of Grandma's estate, particularly the house, which was worth approximately $340,000 in our gentrifying neighborhood. Instead, Grandma's will had been very specific. To my granddaughter Sarah, who visited me every week and listened to my stories, I leave my house and all its contents. She understood the importance of preserving family history. The reading of the will had been uncomfortable. Mom cried, claiming it wasn't fair that the baby of the family got the most valuable asset. Dad accused me of manipulating an elderly woman. My brothers alternated between sulking and making pointed comments about people who take advantage of old ladies. But I hadn't manipulated anyone. I'd simply spent time with Grandma, listening to her stories about the house's history, the changes in the neighborhood, and the families who'd lived there over the decades. She'd often mentioned how important it was to preserve the past, to understand where we came from. What my family didn't know was that those conversations had become much more than nostalgic reminiscences. Grandma had witnessed things in that neighborhood over the years, things that had recently become very relevant to my work. I worked as a federal investigator specializing in organized crime and racketeering. My family thought I was a government clerk, because I'd never corrected their assumptions. It was easier to let them think I filed paperwork all day than to explain that I spent my time building cases against criminal organizations. The house on Maple Street sat directly across from what had been the longtime headquarters of the Torino crime family. For 60 years, Grandma had unknowingly documented the comings and goings of one of the city's most significant criminal enterprises. Her detailed journals, photo albums, and meticulous record-keeping had become crucial evidence in our ongoing federal investigation. When I inherited the house, I'd immediately informed my supervisor about the potential conflict of interest. The Bureau had been monitoring the Torino operation for 3 years, and Grandma's documentation provided the historical context we needed to establish patterns of criminal activity dating back decades. The house itself wasn't just valuable real estate. It was an active crime scene preservation site. Every room contained potential evidence. Grandma's photo albums showed decades of suspicious activity across the street. Her journals mentioned license plate numbers, unusual visitors, and strange late-night activities that perfectly corroborated our surveillance data. 6 months ago, the house had been quietly placed under federal protection as part of our case against Tony Torino and 15 of his associates. The property was legally designated as evidence, though this information was classified and couldn't be shared with my family. My brothers had spent the past year pressuring me to sell the house and split the proceeds 3 ways. They argued that keeping it was selfish, that Grandma wouldn't have wanted family fighting over money, and that I was being unreasonable by not cashing out immediately. "It's just sitting there empty," Marcus complained at every family gathering. "You're not even living in it." "The market's hot right now," David would add. "We could get way more than it's worth if we sell soon." "Sarah's being stubborn," Mom would sigh. "She's always been possessive of things that don't really belong to her." Dad's approach was more direct. "That house is too much responsibility for someone your age. Let your brothers handle the business side." But I couldn't sell the house because it wasn't really mine to sell anymore. Once property becomes evidence in a federal case, it's essentially frozen until the investigation concludes. The Bureau had been very clear. Any attempt to alter, sell, or transfer the property would constitute obstruction of justice. I tried to discourage my family's pressure without revealing the federal complications. "I'm not ready to sell yet," I'd say. "I want to go through Grandma's things first." "You've had 18 months, Marcus would snap. "How long does it take to pack up some old lady's junk?" "Some of us have real financial pressures," David would add. "That house represents serious money just sitting there doing nothing." The situation escalated 3 weeks ago when Marcus started bringing potential buyers to family dinners. Real estate agents, property developers, investors, Anyone who might pressure me to sell quickly. This is Sarah, he'd say, introducing me like I was an obstacle to overcome. She's the one holding up the sale. The potential buyers would look at me with barely concealed irritation, as if I was a difficult child refusing to be reasonable about adult matters. Sometimes family members get emotionally attached to properties, one agent explained condescendingly. But holding on to real estate for sentimental reasons isn't financially smart. I've seen this before, a developer added. Young people inherit property and don't understand the carrying costs. Insurance, taxes, maintenance, it adds up quickly. My family nodded along, treating these strangers' opinions as expert validation of their own frustrations with my stubbornness. Last Sunday's family dinner had been the worst yet. Marcus arrived with a purchase agreement already filled out, missing only my signature and the final sale price. I found a buyer willing to pay $380,000 cash, he announced, spreading the papers across Mom's dining table. $40,000 over market value. We can close in 2 weeks. That's incredible, Mom gushed. Sarah, you have to take this deal. Dad examined the paperwork approvingly. This buyer is serious. Cash offers don't come along often. I told him we'd have an answer by tomorrow, Marcus continued. He's ready to put down earnest money immediately. David pulled out his phone calculator. After closing costs and fees, we're looking at about $125,000 each. That's life-changing money. For some of us anyway, Marcus said, glancing at me. Though I guess when you're used to government salary, any amount seems huge. The comment stung because it revealed how little they thought of my career. In their minds, I was some low-level clerk grateful for whatever scraps came my way. I can't sell the house right now, I said quietly. Why not? Mom demanded. You've been saying that for over a year. What are you waiting for? I'm still going through Grandma's belongings. So pack them up and take what you want, Dad said impatiently. The buyer doesn't want the contents anyway. It's more complicated than that. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Everything's always complicated with you. Some of us have real responsibilities. My business needs capital and this sale could save my company. David's having trouble with his mortgage, Mom added. This money could help both your brothers get back on their feet. And what about Sarah's financial future? David asked sarcastically. Oh wait, she'll be fine. Government jobs have pensions. The dismissal was automatic and complete. In their minds, my stable federal employment meant I didn't need or deserve the inheritance money as much as my struggling brothers. I understand you both need money, I said carefully, but I can't sell the house yet. Can't or won't? Marcus demanded. There are legal complications. What legal complications? Dad asked sharply. The will was clear. You inherited the house free and clear. I couldn't explain that the property was frozen as evidence in a federal case. My security clearance prohibited me from discussing ongoing investigations, even with family. I just need more time, I said. Time for what? Mom asked, frustration evident in her voice. You're being selfish, Sarah. This isn't just about you anymore. Grandma left you that house because she trusted you to do the right thing, Dad added. Hoarding it while your brothers struggle isn't what she would have wanted. The guilt trip was familiar and effective. My family had always been experts at making me feel responsible for everyone else's problems while dismissing my own needs and concerns. I sold Grandma's house and kept the money, Marcus announced proudly at last night's family dinner. I looked up from my plate, confused. What do you mean? I found a buyer willing to pay $375,000 cash. We closed yesterday. Marcus was grinning like he'd just solved world hunger. You weren't using it anyway, Dad supported him immediately. Marcus took initiative while you were being indecisive. Mom nodded approvingly. Finally, someone in this family is thinking practically. How did you sell my house? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. I had copies of the deed from when we were getting everything appraised, Marcus explained. Found a buyer who wanted a quick transaction, no inspections, cash only. David helped with the paperwork, Dad added proudly. It pays to have someone in real estate in the family. We used Grandma's old power of attorney documents, David said casually. Technically, they were never officially revoked, so I was able to act as executor. I stared at my brothers, trying to process what they'd just told me. They'd forged legal documents to sell federal evidence in an active criminal investigation. The buyer was very understanding about the family situation, Marcus continued. He didn't ask too many questions about why the sale was being handled by the siblings instead of the heir. Some investors prefer to work with men anyway, Dad said approvingly. They know we understand business better than someone who's never had to make real financial decisions. Where's the money? I asked quietly. We split it 3 ways like it should have been from the beginning, Marcus said. Your share is in an account we set up for you. $125,000, minus the legal fees and commissions. You'll thank us later, Mom said confidently. This was the smart move financially. The buyer was very motivated, David added. Paid cash, no financing contingencies. The whole transaction took less than a week once we had the paperwork sorted out. I said quietly, I'll handle the paperwork. Marcus laughed. The paperwork's already handled. That's the beauty of having David involved. He knows how to get things done efficiently. You don't have to worry about any of the details, Dad assured me. Your brothers took care of everything. We even packed up Grandma's junk, Mom added. Most of it went to charity, but we saved a few photo albums and her jewelry for you. Everything else was just taking up space, Marcus said dismissively. Old newspapers, magazines, journals full of neighborhood gossip. Nothing worth keeping. My stomach dropped. Grandma's journals and photo albums were key evidence in our federal case. The neighborhood gossip, they'd thrown away documented 60 years of criminal activity. What did you do with the papers and journals? I asked carefully. Threw them out, David shrugged. Who keeps that much old paperwork? The buyer wanted the house empty anyway. Some of those documents might have been important. Important how? Marcus asked. They were just random notes about neighbors and old family stuff. Nothing valuable. We kept the photo albums with family pictures, Mom said defensively. But all those other papers were just clutter. Dad nodded agreement. Grandma was a pack rat. She kept every grocery receipt and newspaper clipping for decades. None of it was worth preserving. I excused myself from dinner and called my supervisor from my car. Agent Rodriguez, we have a problem, I said when he answered. What's happened? My family sold the Maple Street house. They also disposed of all the documentary evidence. There was a long pause. The protected property? The house that's been designated as evidence in the Torino case. Yes. They used forged power of attorney documents to complete an illegal sale. When? The sale closed yesterday. They threw away Grandma's journals and papers this week. Do you know who the buyer was? They mentioned cash sale, no inspections, quick closing. Someone who didn't ask questions about the irregular paperwork. Agent Rodriguez's voice hardened. We need to meet immediately. This is obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and possibly money laundering if the buyer was connected to our targets. What do I do about my family? Nothing yet. Don't let them know about the federal implications. We need to investigate the sale and identify the buyer before we take action. I drove home thinking about how quickly everything had unraveled. My brothers had committed multiple federal crimes trying to access money they thought they deserved. They destroyed evidence in a major organized crime case because they saw Grandma's documentation as worthless clutter. The next morning I was at the federal building early, meeting with Agent Rodriguez and the U.S. attorney assigned to the Torino case. We ran the buyer's information, Agent Rodriguez reported. Vincent Torino, Tony's nephew. He paid cash through a shell company. So this was deliberate, the prosecutor noted. They weren't just buying property. They were buying evidence and access to federal surveillance materials. What are the charges against my family? Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and potentially conspiracy with organized crime if we can prove they knew about the buyer's connections. They didn't know. They just wanted the money. Their ignorance might reduce their sentences, but it doesn't eliminate their criminal liability. They sold federal evidence to organized crime figures. Agent Rodriguez laid out a timeline. We'll need to arrest your brothers immediately. The house sale will have to be reversed and we'll need to search for any remaining evidence. What about the documents they threw away? We'll check local dumps and waste management facilities, but realistically that evidence is probably lost forever. The prosecutor looked grim. Your brothers may have irreparably damaged a 3-year federal investigation. Depending on what evidence was destroyed, we might have to reconsider our entire approach to the Torino case. I thought about Marcus bragging about his business acumen, David proud of his real estate expertise, both of them convinced they'd outsmarted their foolish little sister who didn't understand practical financial matters. Within 24 hours, federal prosecutors filed obstruction charges against both my brothers. The FBI raided their homes and businesses, searching for any connection to the Torino organization and any remaining evidence from Grandma's house. Marcus was arrested at his construction site, in front of his employees and clients. Federal agents served warrants while he was meeting with potential customers, completely destroying his business reputation. David was taken into custody at the real estate office where he worked. His colleagues watched as FBI agents led him away in handcuffs, confiscating his computer and client files. My parents called frantically when they heard about the arrests. "What's happening?" Mom demanded. "Why are federal agents arresting your brothers?" "They sold evidence in a federal criminal investigation," I explained. "What evidence?" "It was just an old house." Grandma's house was across from an organized crime headquarters. Her journals and photos documented criminal activity for 60 years. There was silence on the phone. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm the federal investigator assigned to the case." "You're what?" "I work for the FBI, Mom. I've been building a case against the Torino crime family for 3 years. Grandma's documentation was crucial evidence." "But you said you were a government clerk." "I never said that. You assumed that because you never asked what I actually do for work." Mom's voice became small. "Marcus and David are going to prison, aren't they?" "They sold federal evidence to the suspects we were investigating." "Yes, they're going to prison." "How long?" "Obstruction of justice carries up to 10 years. Evidence tampering is another 5. Conspiracy charges could add more time." I could hear Dad in the background asking what was wrong. Mom was crying now. "They didn't know," she said desperately. "They were just trying to help the family financially. Their intent doesn't matter. They committed federal crimes. Can you help them? You work for the FBI. Surely you have some influence." "I'm a witness in their case now, Mom. I can't help them." The line went quiet except for Mom's sobbing. "Your brothers called you selfish for not selling the house," she said finally. "But you were protecting evidence the whole time." "Yes. And we've been treating you like you were the problem." "Yes." Dad took the phone. "Sarah, I don't understand how this happened. You and Mom spent 18 months pressuring me to sell federal evidence. You supported Marcus and David when they decided to commit crimes to get access to money they weren't entitled to. We didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed I was incompetent and incapable of understanding my own situation. What happens now? Marcus and David will be prosecuted for federal crimes. The house sale will be reversed. The organized crime family they sold evidence to will use this obstruction to argue that our investigation was compromised. What about the money? It's evidence now. Frozen until the trial." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Your brothers were just trying to solve their financial problems. By committing felonies. They didn't understand the consequences. They didn't care about the consequences. They saw something they wanted and took it regardless of my rights or the legal implications." The conversation ended with Dad hanging up on me. Over the next week, more details emerged about my brother's crimes. Marcus had used the illegal proceeds to pay off business debts, thinking he'd solved his financial problems overnight. David had put his share toward a down payment on a new house, celebrating what he thought was his escape from mortgage troubles. Neither had considered that the money might not be legally theirs to keep. The federal investigation revealed that Vincent Torino had been looking for ways to access the Maple Street house for months. When Marcus and David started shopping the property around, he'd identified them as useful opportunities to gain access to evidence that could damage his family's criminal enterprise. "Your brothers were essentially recruited as unwitting accomplices," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The Torino organization used their greed and ignorance to destroy federal evidence." "Will this destroy the case?" "We're assessing the damage. Some evidence can be reconstructed, but we've lost decades of documented surveillance data that can't be replaced." The U.S. Attorney's Office offered my brothers plea agreements, 7 years in federal prison in exchange for full cooperation and testimony about their contact with Vincent Torino. Marcus accepted immediately, terrified by the prospect of a 20-year sentence if convicted at trial. David held out longer, convinced that his real estate license and clean criminal record would convince a jury he was just an unlucky businessman caught up in family drama. His lawyer eventually convinced him otherwise. Both brothers pled guilty to obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. Marcus received 7 years and 3 months in federal prison. David got 6 years and 8 months due to his cooperation in identifying other properties the Torino family had been trying to access. My parents attended both sentencing hearings, sitting in the back row while federal judges explained how their son's greed had compromised a major organized crime investigation. The defendants' actions weren't just theft from their sister, Judge Martinez said during Marcus's sentencing. They were crimes against the justice system itself, committed in partnership with the very criminals federal agents were trying to apprehend. Their ignorance of federal law doesn't excuse their willingness to forge documents and steal protected property, Judge Williams added during David's hearing. The damage to ongoing investigations is immeasurable and irreversible. After the sentencing, Mom approached me in the courthouse hallway. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "We treated you terribly." "Yes, you did. We thought you were being stubborn and selfish. We had no idea you were protecting evidence. You had no idea because you never respected me enough to ask what I was actually doing or why I might have legitimate reasons for my decisions." Dad joined us, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Your brothers are going to federal prison because we pushed them to steal from you. They're going to prison because they chose to commit crimes," I corrected. "You all decided I was incompetent and unworthy of basic respect. That's what led to this. How do we fix this?" Mom asked. "You don't. Marcus and David will serve their sentences. The federal investigation they damaged will proceed without the evidence they destroyed. And I'll continue my career knowing that my own family was willing to sabotage my work because they thought I was too stupid to manage my own inheritance." I walked away from my parents that day and haven't spoken to them since. The house on Maple Street was eventually returned to federal custody after Vincent Torino's purchase was legally voided. The property remains sealed as evidence while the reduced case against his family proceeds through the courts. My brothers are currently serving their sentences in different federal facilities. They'll be eligible for parole in 5 years if they maintain good behavior and continue cooperating with ongoing investigations. I still work organized crime cases, though I've been transferred to different investigations to avoid any appearance of conflict. My new colleagues know me as a thorough investigator who understands the importance of protecting evidence and maintaining security protocols. Sometimes family members think they know what's best for you. Sometimes they're so convinced of their own expertise that they'll commit federal crimes to override your decisions. And sometimes, the quiet family member they've been dismissing for years turns out to be the one person who understood the stakes all along. The federal justice system doesn't care about family dynamics or financial pressures. It cares about evidence, truth, and the rule of law. My brothers learned that lesson too late in a federal courtroom, wearing orange jumpsuits and wondering how their get-rich-quick scheme had destroyed their lives. I learned it much earlier, which is why I spent 3 years quietly protecting evidence while my family spent 3 years loudly demanding I destroy it. In the end, patience and professionalism won out over greed and arrogance. But the cost was higher than anyone had imagined. 2 brothers in federal prison, parents who finally understood their youngest daughter's real capabilities, and a major criminal investigation permanently damaged by family members who thought they knew better than the federal agent they'd never bothered to understand.